to provide an opportunity for Chief Outlaw to make a few comments in regards to the protest on Saturday and to answer some questions that you may have. Chief?
Thank you. Good afternoon. I really wanted to, we've put out a lot of information. What's today, Wednesday? Wednesday. We've put out a lot of information since Saturday, but I really wanted to offer an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you might have of me, because it seems like instead of the actual demonstration being covered, there's a lot of spin-off stories or misinformation that's been put out, and I'd like to clarify that. But first and foremost, I really want to use this opportunity to let everyone know, first of all, the mayor never gave us direction to stand down on Saturday, ever. But I also want to use this opportunity to let the community know and our officers know that they did a really good job on Saturday. It's not about publicly saying whether or not I support our officers. The officers know they did a good job, and they did a really good job with the resources that they had available to them, and given the circumstances that were presented to them all throughout the day on Saturday. And they were very fluid, and they did a good job adapting to the circumstances as they changed. I want to be very clear in that. We've had, I think last year we had a little over 200 demonstrations in this area, in the downtown area, in the central precinct area, that either we had the benefit of planning for, or they were unplanned and we had to get resources pulled together to address them. Very few of them ended in violence. A lot of them ended without incident. But I want the community to know that when we do this, we're pulling resources from all over the place. We're canceling days off. Families are not seeing their loved ones as they originally thought they had. So officers are really sacrificing their time and their skills and their efforts. So a lot of planning that goes into these events, not just the day before, but sometimes weeks in advance when we have the advantage of knowing the dates of these events. But I just want to reinforce and reiterate that the officers involved on Saturday, all the way up through the leadership, I think did a really good job. And not only do we support them, but I think it's important that the community knows that the officers have been called cowards, or there's a perception that they ran away from confrontation, and that couldn't be the furthest from the truth. So I wanted to put that out there. I wanted to clarify those comments and make myself available, and again, for any questions that you may have for me right now.
Chief, could you describe what the rules of engagement were on Saturday for officers? Because there have been critics who say that, for example, Andy No, who was getting assaulted, and others near Pioneer Courthouse who were bloodied, that officers were there but didn't move in to assist.
And I'll say this, you know, when you ask me about rules of engagement, it depends. The answer is it depends on what the officers have in front of them at that time and what our resources are that are present at that time. And what I mean by that is, are officers in a position where they can tactically and safely intervene or confront? That's the first question. Because if we send one officer in there, or if an officer acts alone by his or herself, if they go into a crowd of a couple hundred people or in a melee, and then they're not able to come out safely, what good was that? It doesn't do anyone any good. So the answer is, like I said, the rules of engagement depends. We prefer to move safely. We prefer to be tactful in how we do that. We tend to communicate over the air. We tend to communicate over the air and let others know what we have to bring in additional resources so we can move in and do that safely. And actually that was done quite a few times throughout the day. That was brought to my attention on Saturday. It's unfortunate, and I want to say too that I say that the officers and everyone involved did a really good job, but I do want to acknowledge that there were some injuries there, not just to those who were participating, but to officers as well. When we talk about rules of engagement or outcomes, right, or what's the commander's intent? We don't want anyone to be hurt at all. But unfortunately on Saturday, there were some injuries to all parties involved, and we don't want that to happen. But it could have been a lot worse. I think there was the chance for additional injuries was really leveraged and mitigated. Officers spent a lot of time separating parties, a lot of time, and that takes a lot of, not just time, but resources as well to be able to do that. But like I said, at some point, there has to be consideration as to whether or not when we do intervene, you've heard me say this before, when we do intervene, can we do it safely? And make sure that we not only get there to address the issue, but we can actually get out of there safely as well.
Is the post-demonstration assessment still underway, or is
Yes.
that stopped or ongoing, or
What assessment are you referring to?
an investigation of how police handled this particular demonstration and going forward, how it might be handled differently, if that's the case?
The overall one, or are you talking about for Saturday, an after-action
For
report?
Saturday.
So no, I don't have the after-action report yet for that one. And again, you know, you hear me say this all the time because I mean it. We are a learning organization, and we don't want to continuously step into new events doing the same things if they don't work. So it's important for us to go back and assess what worked for us and what didn't, even if that's during an informal debrief. And then later on down the line with a formalized after-action report as well. But no, I haven't seen that yet. It's still in the works.
Chief, the mayor obviously is your boss, and you go along with what his direction is. But do you feel like that the force is being handcuffed in some way in what they'd like to do to resolve a lot of what's going on when these protests occur?
You know, and I want to be very clear, again, the mayor has not handcuffed us. I think what these stories do and what these headlines do is take away from the actual issue. So there's a couple things that no one's even brought up yet here. The fact that there were entities that planned a brawl in the city of Portland, and no one seems to be upset about that. There's more attention paid to you know, what's been said or how we messaged something and how accurate that part was, as opposed to the fact that entities came here for a fight. If they asked me, hey, there was a protest on Saturday, what was it about? I couldn't even tell you. I don't know what they were protesting against, because they came to fight. With that said, the other part that no one mentions, last November, if you recall, the mayor and I tried to push forth a protest ordinance for this very thing, to try to get ahead of what happened on Saturday. When you know that there are two entities that have a history of violence that come together and it results in violence and or property damage and or vandalism, but overall not good for the safety of all those involved and the city and downtown or wherever the protests are. That ordinance, it didn't make it through. The larger issue is that it's not just about what the mayor and the police chief are trying to do. The mayor happens to be the police commissioner, but this is a different form of government. In order for anything to get passed, there has to be support by other council persons as well. So it's not just the mayor, you know, if there's allegations of the mayor handcuffing us, again, I'll tell you again, that's not true. There are barriers to what we're doing because we don't have strategic resources to get ahead of these things before they start. When I say strategic resources, I mean every demonstration that we've responded to, it's been reactionary. It's after the fact, right? So we tend to try to stay out of the way if they're peaceful or permitted. People are out here demonstrating against their cause or for their cause. If there's not a need for us to interject, we won't. And we stay behind the scenes. But then, because we can't predict what's going to happen, if something blows over or bubbles up and it becomes violent, now we're reacting. And our response time to these altercations or violence or whatever it is, it might not always be on the spot if we don't have, again, the resources to address it right away, or if we're not even there to witness it. So a lot of our response, even from Saturday, ends up being follow-up investigation. So you might have seen we're pushing out a lot of photos of people that we're looking for, either witnesses or suspects that are involved in the assaults that happened on Saturday. But it's Wednesday. This happened on Saturday. Meanwhile, people have been in and out of the hospital, and they want justice, and rightfully so. We need strategic resources to get ahead of this before it starts, so it's not even allowed to happen in the first place.
Meaning more officers? In other words, Gresham was involved. Was there anybody else involved? Any other
Multnomah County
agencies?
Sheriff's Office was here to help us. The Federal Protective Service, FPS, provided security for their facilities as well. But that's not what I mean. In other states, you'll see that it's illegal to wear a mask during a commission of a crime. I understand, and we solely support, wholeheartedly support, individuals' First Amendment rights to free speech. But we cannot allow to continue to allow people to use the guise of free speech to commit crime. Meaning, I'm out here saying what it is, I'm constitutionally allowed to say, but I'm committing an act of violence in the meantime. And I'm gonna do it knowing that I can completely cover my identity by remaining anonymous, making it harder for us to identify you as it's occurring or even after the fact while it's occurring. So legislation would really be helpful prohibiting the wearing of masks during the commission of a crime. That's what I mean about being strategic and getting ahead of it before it starts. It's also very difficult for us, and this is state law. A lot of folks ask, well, why is it that you have more footage of one particular side's activity as opposed to the other side? We can't constantly record like the public does. So the public might have ongoing footage of an incident where we might only have snapshots. And that's because we're only allowed to actually record when we believe there's criminal activity that occurs. It's not like that in other places. I was asked when I first got here by a lot of you, what's the differences between where you came from and here? The laws are different. And so there might be more tools available in other areas, not just resource-wise as far as number of officers, but there might be more legislative tools available to other jurisdictions that we don't have here.
But if somebody's wearing a mask, or they're not wearing a mask, and they're committing a crime, what difference does it make when it comes to arresting them?
I would take it even further than that. If you knew that you can be easily identified, do you think you would be as inclined to commit that act of violence or commit that crime? Personally, individually, would you even be willing to do it? For a lot of people, the answer is no. A lot of people are emboldened because they know they can't be identified, or it's more difficult to identify them either before or after the fact. So that's why that makes it a little bit more critical. It's not about whether or not we can arrest them, it just takes longer to do it. You gotta identify them if you say, okay, well, who was responsible for doing that? And if we weren't present or we weren't able to, witness it, oh, it was that person over there wearing all black and had their face covered and had on a mask. Well, which one? Right? So, stuff like that.
Can you give an update to some of the threats that were made towards the city recently?
Well, there were a couple of, I don't have all of the specifics available. There were some calls that were made to City Hall yesterday morning threatening a bomb in the building, and we worked with G4S Security to do a sweep of the entire City Hall. While the City Hall was evacuating, we found that there was no credibility to those threats, and then everyone was allowed back in the building.
Do you anticipate if this legislation or other tools aren't provided, do you anticipate any changes in the police approach to these protests? Because, this isn't the first time Portland's gained national attention for the fights and brawls breaking out in downtown.
I would really hope that this weekend, and you're right, this isn't the first time we've gained national attention. And I would love to get national attention for the positive things that we do. I would really hope that this not only brings to the forefront the issues that PPB is dealing with, but I hope it empowers others in the community and in the city to step forward and condemn criminal violence. Again, it's not something that solely the mayor and the chief of police are responsible for. It has to be driven by community, and community has to step forward and say enough is enough. What else can we do? What other tools can we provide to let folks know that this is not the place for this and it won't be tolerated and accepted?
Go ahead.
Is there any anything new investigation on the gentleman or the person that was beat up on Saturday?
Is there?
I know.
That's a good question. Tina might know. I know
Okay.
we've pushed out additional information, but I don't know as far as
So
155
regarding
is there.
all of the assaults, we've had a number of assaults that have been reported to us and are actively under investigation. As we can, we've been pushing out photographs and asking for the public's help so that we can try and identify and hold people accountable. Because they're active investigations, we aren't able to disclose a lot of detail, but we do take these investigations seriously, and like the chief mentioned, violence is not condoned in our community. Criminal violence is something that we wish to have not happen at all. And now that it's after the fact, we are doing everything we can to try and hold those accountable.
Could you address the concerns that have been raised over the last few days about the tweet that went out from the Bureau regarding the milkshakes and its substance?
That's what I meant by a shiny object. We do our very best to share information as we get it. And I don't use transparency as a buzzword, but when we use Twitter, it's in that spirit. It's as we get information, we want to alert the public to what's known to us. So then that way, there's not, or hopefully as many questions as to why we're doing certain things after the fact. We received information that within the milkshakes, there might have been, or there was a substance similar to cement, including one of our leaders or one of our lieutenants down in the field who saw it, smelt it, felt it, touched it, who works with cement all the time, and said, hey, this is cement. So in good faith, we put this information out. Now, whether or not we put the word may in front of something somewhere or put a period or a comma somewhere different, I choose not to focus on that. I think we put that information out in good faith. There were no ill intentions behind it whatsoever, and it was in an effort to keep everyone safe. Because what if later on down the road we find out that yes, this was in fact cement in these milkshakes, and it was learned that we received information in advance that this information or that this substance was put in this milkshake, and we didn't tell the community about it. There's a public safety risk there, or a threat, not a threat, but a public safety risk that I think we were entitled and obligated to share. And hopefully, in the end, it was a vegan milkshake that I read somewhere. But I think it's our obligation to put that information out there in the event that it was.
What steps are going to be taking? The summer is upon us, and there's additional protests planned and advertised by these two groups in July and August. So how is the Bureau going to prepare for that?
We'll continue to plan. I think the biggest thing for us are resources, bodies, and when we talk about issues that no one really wants to address, right? There's also the fact that we've had nearby agencies say that they weren't going to provide mutual aid. So that's taking away from the potential resource pool as well. At this point, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to sit down at the table, not just the Bureau, not just the mayor's office, but the entire city and the community. We have to sit down at the table and figure out a better way to address this to make sure that this doesn't even happen in the first place. That's what I'll be continuing to do in the next couple of weeks or so, well before the end of the month and before August. But we have to do something differently because ultimately our officers, everyone's gonna get burned out. And we can't continue to, again, address the same matters in the same way.
Do you think there's anything that can be put in place